get rid of that.
How long do you suppose we'll be chatting for?
Ideally like 90 minutes, if that's okay.
Okay.
Have you got that? That's how long most of them are usually about an hour and a half.
Fine.
Is that all right? Yeah.
Let's have some fun.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Hello there, people and listeners of the Hungry Podcast. Today I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Spencer Matthews onto the podcast. Spencer is founder of Clico, a alcohol-free spirits brand that do a gin, a tequila, a whiskey, all alcohol-free. They've had conglomerate success in the UK, super fast. Sainsbury's, Tesco, Morrison's, Ocado listings. And they're now actually rolling out in, I think, 7 states in the US. So California, Texas, Florida, had a huge amount of backing. And look, mate, I'm super excited for this. And as I said, really appreciate you doing this on a bank holiday Monday.
No better time, mate.
So I've actually got some here. I was boshing some back this weekend as like an in-between, because I love a drink. I don't want to be sanctimonious and demonize and weaponize booze straight from the off, but I do like a drink. But having it in between is just, it really, really is delicious, and it kind of cuts through. I don't know, you just don't end up as boozed up and feel fresh as a daisy the next day. It's actually delicious.
Drinking clean in between, we'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. So I was doing a lot of research for this conversation, mate, and kind of outside looking in, you seem to have kind of this kind of rambunctious, unshakable resilience, this kind of thunderous tenacity in everything you do, whether that's climbing Everest, doing marathons across the desert, or stopping drinking. And where I want to start this conversation is kind of unpacking that resilience and that grit. And I think the best place to start is probably sorry, that was mine, is probably the is Everest, and kind of the bone-shatteringly cold mountains. And I think lots of our listeners, in some respects, are brands climbing their own Everest. And I think there are a lot of parallels between climbing Everest and building a brand. But I took this from your Instagram, and it said, day 2, the first day was one of the hardest I've been through in my life. Extreme conditions that are no way forgiving. Tough, arduous, long and painful, freezing. The desire to pull the plug and go home was just present throughout. What was the single moment?
Then that's some. So hang on. There's two things here. I was recently on Everest making a documentary film about finding my brother, which comes out in February. I think the post that you're referring to there was the Ice Ultra, which did not take place on Everest, but I don't know how you want to. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, that just sums up how many hard things you've done, mate. I'd like to start on the Everest, to be honest.
Okay.
I think it's because that was the next place I wanted to go. Because again, I think there's a lot of resilience and hardship in that documentary series about finding your brother. What was the hardest moment on that? And I think there'll be lots of lessons for that for listeners.
So I can't talk too much about the film, and I know that's really irritating. When I listen to people saying that they can't discuss something, I ask myself what the point of bringing it up was. But in terms of resilience and experience, I think living at altitude is tough, right? We were up there for about 5 weeks, in order to shoot the film, within the correct weather window that we had. I had to leave my 4 or 5 day old newborn to head up to trek into base camp. And for those that don't know, base camp is almost exactly the height of the summit of Kilimanjaro. So it's not the world's highest point, of course, because that's up at the summit, but it's high enough, and it's some people find the trek even into base camp quite tricky. Fortunately our team was fine with that, just about. But once you're up there for days at a time, weeks at a time, it's quite physically, and I'm not the most emotional person, but it's quite emotionally draining as well, particularly when you're up there for the reasons that I was up there. So I think it's when you're met with a situation that you really have no choice but to handle it. You can either allow it to get under your skin and bother you, and then you're constantly facing that, or, you know, you just try and get on with it. And, you know, having said that, Everest Base Camp's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to. But when you're there for as long as we were, you know, it can quite quickly become, you get used to it quite quickly, basically. And then you are just up in the mountains, you know, with sorry, there appears to be some kind of tractor driving past me.
Oh, no worries, mate.
Yeah. So it's, it was more just, you know, you're alone with your thoughts quite a lot. You know, I kind of, like almost violently missed my family, you know, really wanted to be home, of course, with my newborn. And it wasn't lost on me that Vogue was having to, you know, carry the weight of a newborn, which I think, you know, most parents will tell you can be quite tricky, can be tough on sleep, etc. So, yeah, I felt like what I was doing was, you know, couldn't be missed and had to be done. Unfortunately, my wife agreed with me that, you know, she would do the same if she was in my shoes. And so there was no friction there at all, thankfully, because that would have been really difficult to manage. And, you know, she was nothing but supportive. So it was fine. You know, it's the altitude thing is you get out of breath really quickly, like really easily. And it's just quite funny. Like, you know, you'll walk from your tent to the sink and brush your teeth and walk back to the tent, and it'll feel like you've, you know, been for a 10K kind of, you know, and you have to sit down for a minute. And, you know, even just, you know, wandering around up there, you don't go too far from the tent. You know, it can actually be quite dangerous even up there. So just having the experience of being up there was great. Obviously I felt very close to my brother. But yeah, unfortunately I'm not going to discuss the film that we made because, as I'm sure you've seen, I posted the other day about what it's about. It's on my Instagram. Yeah, my partners, Disney, are pretty keen that we don't say too much about it until nearer the time. It comes out in February.
No, we'll keep it shum. And I think, you know, as I said, there's lots of parallels between building a brand and almost build, you know, like going up Everest, and what you said there about it being emotionally draining, alone with your thoughts, you know, violently missing your family. And I think there are parallels to building a brand. What lessons did you take from that trip that you think will set you up for success with CleanCo and managing your team there?
I think being able to detach kind of emotion from dealing is quite important. I think when you've faced, you know, some hardship, and you've got through it, it's handy, right? I think when I first launched the brand and I had no business experience to speak of, you know, when something went, you know, against you a bit, your instinct is to, you know, sort it out, but you're not necessarily calm in how you do it, you know, because it means so much to you that it has to go right. So, you know, there was definitely more emotion attached to how I would handle situations. Whereas now I think having been in the market for, you know, 2.5, 3 years and having put myself through certain situations recently since sobriety, you know, the Marathon des Sables, the Ice Ultra, this Everest thing, I think you learn how to deal with just moving through kind of pain. And that's the same, right? I do quite a lot of jiu-jitsu as well. And, you know, in the early stages of being a white belt, you know, you're kind of almost when someone's on top of you, you can't move, they're suffocating you, they're choking you. Your initial reaction is to, you know, spend all your energy trying to get that person off you. And, you know, you gas out, right? Because you're panicking. And I think that's, unusually similar to business. You know, if you spend all your energy freaking out, you know, over something that's an issue, you'd be better off just, you know, taking a couple of deep breaths, trying to figure out a way through it and just tackling the actual problem without any emotion. So I think that's kind of, you know, and having a positive mindset naturally helps as well. I think, you know, I tend to see the good in a bad situation. I tend to see the good in a bad person even. And I know that's not always right, but, you know, I like to believe that, you know, there's a silver lining even in a terrible situation. You know, we've been through a lot as a business. We've raised, you know, substantial amounts of money. We've tried, you know, a lot of different routes to success, and we kind of now know what works and what doesn't. And it's, you know, there's been plenty of bumps along the way.
No, I love that. And I think it's so interesting what you've said there. It's almost like the value comes in the suffering. So when there's, if something's easy, there's no value in it really. So whether that's the arduous route you're taking on the Alps Ultra, or the, probably butchering away, I said that the Marathon des Sables, I think, is like that, you know, that earth-scorchingly hot run through the desert. Like, the value comes from the suffering. I think there's loads in that for listeners. And it's almost about the harder things you do, whether that's literally in business or in terms of like your runs and stuff like that, it will make everything else easier and allows you to stay calm in that situation.
There's no better feeling than, and I would urge anyone to have a go at stuff that they find uncomfortable, because there's honestly no greater feeling than achieving something that you thought you might fail at, right? And it's kind of like, I'll always remember crossing the finish line at the Marathon des Sables, you know, and that's 6.5 marathons in 5 days in the desert. It was the hottest one on record in the Sahara, because the bloke who created it, some mad egotistical French bloke, had the whole thing shut down basically by COVID for 2 years or 3 years even. So he wasn't, so he was so impatient to wait till February or March or whenever it usually is, that he did one in October, and it was the hottest one on record. The hottest recorded temperature whilst we were running was 59 degrees Celsius. So it's, you know, crazy. A guy died, you know, somebody else died in hospital, I think, but they weren't as open about that because it wasn't deemed their responsibility anymore. So, you know, people are literally dying, running this race, and it was, you know, incredibly full on. And when we got to the end, you just had this feeling of like, I can literally do anything, right? And I think, you know, despite, you know, walking around with that kind of thinking that way in general is probably not the most attractive way, or even the most real way to think. But for that moment, you know, in that hour, right, when you cross the finish line, you've put yourself through something that, you know, you feel perhaps most couldn't. And that's exciting to me. I like that kind of thing, right? And in business, I think, you know, the more you know, achieve, and the more you know, break barriers, and you know, my brother has a fund, and you know, quite often he was looking at what I was doing going like, that's going to be impossible to get that over the line. And then of course you get it over the line, and it's kind of like, you know, again, you've got a similar feeling of, well, maybe what we're doing is really special, and maybe what we're doing is different. And you know, again, I think it's really important to try and remain rooted, even when you are doing things that perhaps, you know, other startups around you aren't. You know, it's very important not to get completely carried away with how, you know, well something might be going, because in startup land, as I'm sure you know, you're never actually fully safe, you know. And what you said as well about you know, things being difficult and learning from hardship, nothing incredible ever came easily, I don't think. You know, there might be the odd company, the odd White Claw, you know, that just does crazy numbers, you know, from the off. But that is, going into business thinking that you're going to do that is a total waste of time. And I think you need to understand that most big brands, most big recognizable companies, you know, that are consumed by millions of people, you know, all over the globe, took a lot of time and effort to get them where they were. You know, it's an overnight success is very rarely going to teach you anything.
Mm-hmm. No, completely. And I think if going to, as I say, like the earth-scorchingly hot desert, in Marathon des Sables, what did you learn about yourself that you didn't expect to learn doing that? Because I think, and I've listened to like Joe Rogan, all these podcasts, and David Goggins, these people who like put themselves through this, like they're like masochists. They're just like put themselves through this. I'm like, you're fucking crazy. But what did you learn about yourself that you didn't expect to learn doing that?
I think Nims Purja sums this up quite well in 14 Peaks. When he says, when you think I don't know if you're allowed to swear, bleep it out on the podcast if you need to.
Oh, sorry, go for it, mate.
I think he says something like, when you think you're fucked, you're only 40% fucked. You're only about 40% fucked. So there's a whole, 60% left to give when you think you've got to give up, right? You're nowhere near actually having to give up. And you learn that in the Marathon des Sables big time, because it's you're covering just short of 250 kilometers in the Sahara, and it's kind of the one to give up is pretty real, I think, for most people. Like quite early, there was quite a significant drop off on day one. A lot of people dropped out of this race. More than 60% dropped out of the race. So of 840 people, over 500 dropped out. Something like that anyway. And it was just interesting to really understand how far you can push yourself. Like, because you'd get to the end of each day and you'd feel like that was just like you couldn't possibly go any further. And then you get back to your tent and you have something to eat and then you relax. But your legs are just like, I don't know if anyone listening has done even a marathon. And by the end of the marathon, you're like, you can be in bits, right? It's kind of like, that's it then. You're not going to go running the following day. Almost certainly, right? So this is that, but it's like you are going running the following day and actually you're doing more than you've done the day before. And then you get to day 4, right? So you've done 3 days of this. You get to day 4 and you've got an 82.5 kilometer double marathon with a mountain thrown in at the end. And that's the day that really gets quite dark, I think, for some people, because by the time I got to the mountain, it was dark. You start at 7 a.m., by the way. So, I got to the mountain. It was dark. It took an hour and 45 minutes to climb the mountain. That was at kilometer 60. Then you've got half a marathon left after that in the dark. And you're fucked. Like it's over, right? Like, and then the following day, you've got like a rest day the following day, but then you've got another marathon, and it's kind of just like, it's kind of never ending. It's long and it's, pretty arduous to say the least. So sorry, in a really long-winded way to answer your question, I guess you realize that you can push yourself further than you think you can. So like, say you go for a nice run one day and then the following day, you're a bit stiff and you're like, I'm not going to go running today. You can go running, just lace up and go running, so it's kind of it's a good, interesting way of understanding that your body can probably take a lot more than you think it can take. And I always saw the Marathon des Sables as a game of mental resilience. Obviously it's really physical, but it's like, it's not as physical as you might think, because obviously to cover that kind of distance, you can't run the whole thing. Well, the some lads run the whole thing, but I mean, that is just, I don't understand how that's even possible. But the guy who wins it has won it 11 times, I think. And he's a Moroccan lad and he runs the entire thing. And it's like, it's literally impossible, because you're faced with dunes. There's a day, I think it's day 2, which is like 14 kilometers is through sand dunes. And by sand dunes, I mean like they're rolling sand dunes. The sand is super soft. So like climbing these things is really irritating. So like, that 13 kilometer stretch takes, 6 hours or something. And it's just like, couldn't be more irritating to get through this thing. And by the end, you're just totally sapped of any energy that you might have. And then you've got a marathon to run, at the end of it. It's just like, so I don't know. It was, watching these guys running through the sand dunes was just so eye opening. It was like watching, those little, what are they called? Are they skaters on the ponds? Those little kind of insects that don't drop into the water and they can just like skim across the water. That's how they run across the sand. They're super light as well. So they don't really they just scamper across the sand, and it's pretty impressive stuff.
No, that's so interesting. I think what you said there is so true, and it's brilliant for our listeners. It's like when you feel like you're fucked, you're 40% of the way there, and a lot of it is just showing up, whether you want to or not. It's showing up day in, and it's same for business. Just keep. It's almost that consistency and that mental resilience. And for our listeners, Nim, he like on that moment when he taught you about like the 40% fucked, is there anything else he taught you kind of about more like from a leadership lens? Because I've watched that documentary and I've listened to him on Joe Rogan. He seems like he's a great leader of people. Is there anything he taught you about leadership that you then implement running your team at CleanCo?
He's a very black and white kind of never give up kind of guy, right? So to him, everything is possible. You know, and you should get him on, by the way, because he's super interesting. But there's no room for even the thought of failure in his mind, right? So it's kind of like, we're going to do this, and this is the way it's going to be, and it's black and white. It's not. There's no grey. You know, he's a Gurkha, right? So he only knows pushing yourself to the absolute limits. You know, he only knows. You know, he does a lot of climbing nowadays with no oxygen. You know, I think he's a bit bored of being the best climber in the world. So he just now kind of makes himself, he kind of hinders his own success wherever possible by, you know, doing all kinds of weird stuff now. And he's a really interesting individual. And of course is in the film that we've just made. He leads the expedition. So it was, very interesting to spend a lot of time with him. But he, you know, I'm not even sure there's any self-doubt at all in his mind. You know, I spoke to Ant Middleton the other day, who I think is very interesting, and you know, he's obviously a huge pioneer of positive mindset and kind of what that can do for a person, a business, whatever. And I think there's people who naturally think that way, and then there's people who have to teach themselves to think that way. I think he's kind of almost the latter, actually. You know, he hasn't always been like that, but he's become that way. And he has doubts like a normal human being, right? Like Nims kind of isn't a normal human being. Like Nims, like things that you might, he's quite machine-like, you know, and he doesn't kind of, sometimes his thought process isn't even, you know, that rational because it's just, he doesn't see it.
Would you? No, mate. It's interesting, and this is why another thing I wanted to explore is almost like the nature versus nurture of this resilience and this grit and this like believe that you can do anything. Because I think on one part of the spectrum, it is you're kind of maybe there's a DNA of like someone who just wants to achieve these huge things, and most people I interview on this podcast have that. But then the other part is like how much of it is taught and how much of it is it learnt. And I think it's interesting comparing Nim, which you probably say he's just born with it, versus Ant Middleton, who's probably had to build it. Where would you say you sit on that spectrum? Like, do you have doubts with CleanCo where do you sit on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's completely normal to have doubts, right? I think don't mistake having doubts with knowing that you'll succeed, right? Because like I will, like, you know, in the back of my mind, CleanCo can't fail. Like, it's as simple as that. That's not to say that it won't, but the way I think in my psyche is that, you know, I'm born with huge amounts of confidence, and, you know, that's often throughout my 20s and my life been mistaken for arrogance. And I'm not saying that I don't have some arrogance to me, but it's mostly confidence, right? I exude confidence, and I'm a big believer of confidence. And I hope my kids are confident, and, you know, I think it's kind of an important trait to have. I think the more rounded a businessman you become, and the more you develop as a person, I think it's important to be balanced, right? Because there's that youthful energy and arrogance and ego and kind of confidence that can be attractive, I think, you know, in a fundraise or you know, when you're first getting a business off the ground. I think, you know, just wildly believing in yourself and your brand, I think, is valuable and important for people to understand. But I think thinking that you can't fail is dangerous, although, you know, I like to believe that we're, you know, always going to succeed, and I'm still a huge buyer of our space, you know, and I think that, you know, we're very likely to be a success. I think speaking in these absolute terms can make for a kind of weaker overview of that person. I think having a balanced view and being, as I grow older, this is kind of, I'm becoming, I think, just a little bit more considered in the way that I think. You know, if you'd taken me 2 years ago, Cleanco's going to be $1 billion brand. You know, we're going to be in every country. We're going to, you know, and we will get bought for this. That's just the way it's going to be. And I think now, you know, that may happen. It may not happen quite in that way. You know, I think it's just important to be more rounded. I didn't particularly answer the question.
No.
There,
You absolutely did.
It's important just not to be. And I've got nothing against Nims, but I think if you're climbing a mountain, there's one thing to believe you're not going to die, right? Because the alternative is you die. I think when you're growing a business, to not at least have all things covered and to understand what could go wrong, you know, not understanding what could go wrong is a detriment to the business, and just being blind to anything but your plan going the way you think it might go, you know, you'd be ill-advised to think that way. So, you know, what I'm trying to say is I feel that I've evolved as a person, and although I naturally think like Nims, that everything's going to be fine and that we should do this because it's the best way forward, I try to have a more balanced view on what could go wrong, because I think it's important to anticipate not necessarily failure, but hardship, and just to understand it.
No, definitely. And I think I interviewed Rich from Moju, and he said something about giving yourself is kind of a bit more nuanced than the, you know, no option of failure. But he said no optionality. So it's like you appreciate that things are going to go wrong, but in the grand scheme of things, you give yourself no option. Like, I am going to make this work.
Yeah.
And I think it's great for our listeners, because I think, you know, I was at Bread and Jam the other week, which is like a foodie festival for our kind of industry, and then I think some people are like seeing it as their side hustle or as their little thing on the side. I was like, you're fucked if you're thinking like that. Like, you have to give yourself no optionality. You've got to like go all in, but then you need to almost balance that with a bit of, you know, pragmatism, I suppose. What would you say to, so you're now 3 years into this, Spencer, like, what would you say to yourself, like if you could say one thing to yourself back when you started? Because I think you're right in this. You need to have this wild belief, because that gets people in, investors, team members, it gets everyone into the brand. But what would you say to yourself?
Just perhaps trust less easily. You know, I think I was always very open to learn, right? I was very open to understanding how I could broaden my own knowledge, right? So I'd never been an entrepreneur before, really. And I didn't have all the answers, right? Obviously. And I still don't. And I don't think anyone does. Otherwise everyone would do it. And I think it's, you know, I put a lot of trust, early on in people who knew more about the space than I did. And that's fine, because we did very well. But I think when you're building a brand, you know, your gut feel for how certain things should be is really important. And just quickly, just before we finish this question, just to go back to what you were saying about side hustle and stuff. I think I'm an angel investor as well. I invest in quite a few things, and I pretty much, you know, go on the person, on the people, you know, on what it means to them, and on whether or not I think they can execute. Not necessarily the plan that's in the deck, you know, because it's, you know, it's finger in the wind stuff most of the time, right? And, you know, funds will hate hearing that, but I suspect they must know that as well, right? It's kind of, there's no way of knowing what you're going to turn over in 3 years' time. It just doesn't work that way. And of course you can work to a plan and a budget that, you know, if things stay similar to how they are now, then we should grow at this rate. That's fine. But that doesn't account for all the exciting and wonderful things you can do as a startup that may completely change the course of your growth, right? So I find it, when talking to people who are looking for money, I find it really interesting to understand just how hard they will dig into the success of their own brand. And like, if it gets tough, and if they run out of cash, and if they're unable to prove, you know, what they say, how long will they stick with it before going, well, that didn't work, right, I'm just going to go and do the next thing, because that's your investment gone, right? So it's kind of, And it's funny how you see people who, you know, still have one foot in the door at their old job, and they're like, well, we're just going to have a look at this, and, you know, we're going to raise a bit of money and see what can happen. But, you know, I'm going to continue working at my other job, you know, just in case, you know. And it's like, well, you know, I'm not a buyer of that.
No, completely, and that's why I had to, well, sadly, like, part ways with the peanut butter money life, because I was like, this podcast is now becoming like, I want to fucking take this huge, like, I want a studio, like, obviously I'm doing it now, recording from my bloody parents' house, but the goal is huge, and I've got to just keep pushing. It's like, eventually I was like, I've got to be all in. I can't be one foot in the other and one foot in the out, otherwise you're stretching yourself too thin, essentially. And I love what you said there about going kind of all in. I want to now kind of explore the genesis of CleanCo. But first, and I'm actually kind of asking this selfishly, really, I want to understand how you stopped drinking. Like, I love a drink, right? I've got a very addictive personality. So once I start something, I'll just like, it could be good things like work. But equally, it could be going to the pub on a Thursday. I'm like, all right, I have one drink, and I'm like, got that little voice being like, go on, mate, like, why don't you have a cigarette now? Then another drink, and it just keeps going. I'm just like, for fuck's sake. Yeah. And I start half my week super healthy, and it's almost like this yin and this yang. I would love to know, like, what was your last kind of night on the booze? And then how did you actually stop drinking? Like, what was the toolkit? Did you see a therapist? Like, because I think on paper it's very easy, but in practice it is discombobulatingly hard to actually do. Yeah.
I think for me, I'm all or nothing. So, you know, the attempts to moderate just were completely lost on me. Like, it was, you know, I knew for, you know, some time that I had, I guess, a drinking problem, if you want to call it that. But, like, I'm not blaming anyone but myself. But when I left university after 1 year, I wanted to be an actor, went to film school. Then I decided that I didn't really need a degree, even if I became an actor. Like, I'm sure that the casting agent's not going to give a shit if I have a, you know, degree from USC in theatre studies. You know, they're either going to give me the role or they're not. Then I kind of realized, you know, quite early, remember that I used to drink a lot, right? So I gave up on that. I just thought, actually, look, it's really competitive, and, you know, I wasn't really putting in the work, right? I was at university just having a great time, you know, and I wasn't doing anything really outside of that. So left uni to come and get a job, kind of in finance, because what my brother did, and I became a broker at ICAP. And honestly, like, on our first day, I was taken out by my desk head, and I think we had 15 pints of Guinness, right, each. Yeah. And, you know, I was pretty totaled after that, and came back to the office. You got to work the rest of the afternoon. I just, you know, wasn't, and that continued for like most of the month, right? And I was there, and like a different desk head would take you out, and you're just drinking wine. Like there's a serious booze culture in broking in the city. And like, I drank a lot before that, right? So I was right at home, absolutely loved it. Like, part of my job was drinking, which is great. Yeah. So it was part of my job. And then, you know, I'd entertain clients until, you know, really late, and come in and just, you know, drinking. Drinking was just, you know, I put on 2.5 stone, I think, you know, in the early months of working at ICAP. Didn't even see it coming, you know, just ballooned like some, you know, blow up doll. And then basically, left that to do Made in Chelsea. And you know, that was pretty social as well. For the first season, I was also working at ICAP. So, you know, some of my scenes that looked like they were during the day were actually at night, and we've had light coming in that was like, we'd set up rigs to have like what looked like sunlight coming through the windows if I'm doing it. So the whole thing was a mess, right? Because I wasn't available to film any other time apart from, you know, after work. And my point here, in a really long-winded way, is that, you know, it was just so normal for me to have a drink. And, you know, prior to working at ICAP, I had a, you know, promotions company in nightclubs, and I'd set that up with my mate when we were kind of 19, and we were just drinking all the time, basically. And it just became harder as I grew older to sustain this kind of, you know, bad habits that I had, which was just to have a few beers with lunch, a bit of wine with dinner every day, right? So like, there was no it wasn't like, let's go night clubbing and raving all the time. And it wasn't like, oh, I'm crawling into bed, you know, at 4 a.m. Like I was a really good drunk, right? Like I was never aggressive. I was never violent. Like, you know, I thought I was quite good fun. I think most would agree that I was quite good fun. You know, like it wasn't like a detriment. It was detriment to my health, but it wasn't like I wasn't like one of the, I'll come to how I got sober in a sec, but it was kind of almost all right. Like when I came out as right, I'm sober, quite a few people were just like, I didn't realize you had a drinking problem. And it was kind of like, oh, well, thanks, I guess. Like, you know, I don't know. But, and like in the early stages of giving up alcohol, you know, I had a look at the steps. I went to AA. I went to 3 AA meetings in total. Couldn't handle them. I just, for me, it was like, it was really bizarre. It was like you dwell in negativity in those meetings. And by the way, just for the record, I'm not saying that AA, you know, is a system that doesn't work. Obviously, it helps millions of people all over the world get clean, and a lot of people rely on it, you know, wholeheartedly to maintain their sobriety, and that's great. And whatever works, and that's super. For me, I found it very negative, like very negative. You know, there were people in there that had been sober for 15, 16, 17 years, and they're still talking about, you know, what like, alcoholism does. And it's like, mate, you've been clean 17 years. Like you're good. Like you're through it, surely. And they're like, no, I still feel like drinking like every day. And it's like, really? Like you must be used to not drinking by now. Right. And anyway, again, that's not me. That's not me being, you know, in any way, like insulting, I hope, right? But for me, like, you know, a lot of dark tales of what that last night of drinking was like. And I just thought, God, I would much prefer to sit in a group of people who talk about the benefits of sobriety and talk about what can be achieved now that you've got a clear mind and a clear head, and what, you know, what we can do now that we're different, right? And like, how can you better use that time? And that's kind of, it's part of how, our latest platform, a life less wasted, came about, which I love, right? And it's, you know, it's all about your average person spending 252 hours hungover each year. And, you know, we say, what would you do with that time back? You know, some say CleanCo sell non-alcoholic spirits. You know, we say we sell time, right? The one thing that people can't buy. And I thought that was like really great, you know, that we can basically sell you 252 hours of your year back. That's 10.5 days. You know, what are you going to do with this 10.5 days now that you drink clean? Which I love. So it's all about positivity. And, you know, we as a brand don't ever want to, you know, sit here and slag off alcohol. We don't ever want to say alcohol's not fun. We don't ever want to say, you know, you shouldn't be drinking, because everyone should do exactly as they please, right? And it was kind of like, for me, it's giving people choice without compromise. It's saying, you know, you don't have to drink a gin and tonic, but if you feel like having a gin and tonic, have a clean gin and tonic, right? It tastes the same. It looks nice. It's, you know, exactly the same ritual as making yourself a gin and tonic, but far fewer calories, no alcohol. You know, you can have 20 of these and, you know, wake up feeling fine the following day. And, you know, if you are drinking to get drunk, fine. You know, drink to get hammered, no problem. But, you know, we are the other side of that. We're saying drink for the experience of drinking alcohol. You don't need to get drunk. You know, and actually, most people, in fact, anyone who's ever been drunk will tell you that being drunk isn't fun, right? It's the kind of drinks leading to getting drunk, perhaps, that are good fun. Nobody ever has woken up hungover saying, God, I wish I drank more alcohol last night. That's never, ever happened. Yeah. And it's kind of like, it's just a funny one when you see people having, in inverted commas, a great time, you know, and then it quickly descends into, you know, slurring, not making any sense, vomiting, crashing out, you know, and then spending half the day in bed. You know, that's, anyway, in my opinion, something that I don't miss.
Yeah, there's so much in that. I think the first thing is for me is, and I listened to a podcast in prep for this, and I think you said after 3 drinks, like that's after that is kind of, that's the cutoff point, right? And on Thursday, I was at this gig in Victoria Park, Tame Impala. And I was basically in the middle of this gig, and I was listening to the music, and I was like thinking, "Fuck! Like the bar's so far away that I can't get a drink." And I was just like, "Your quote kind of rifled home." I was like, "Yeah, it's so he's so right. It's been so right. It's like, not after that third drink, like what are you chasing?" And I'd love to know, like, if you didn't go and see a therapist, and you didn't go and you went to a couple of AA meetings. And I think this isn't just about not drinking. This is about whether that voice, a lot of what we've got to do as brands and being successful in business is dealing with the voice, whether that voice is, have a bit of chocolate, or, have a drink, or don't go on the run, or, don't put the extra hour in. How do you deal with that voice? If you haven't gone and seen a therapist, or like, what is your toolkit to deal with that voice? I suppose
I did see a therapist, and I loved it. Kind of previously, like not the final time of giving up. I saw a guy called Chip Summers.
What a name!
Who I loved. I thought he was brilliant. And like the first time I ever spoke to Chip was actually a few years ago. And I haven't spoken to him since I've been sober, actually, weirdly. But a few years ago, my agent thought that I drank very heavily, thought that I'd become less reliable than perhaps I could be. And he said, I want you to go and see this guy because he's going to help you. And I'm sure he won't mind me saying, was a big part of Russell Brand's sobriety, Davina McCall, so he had done the impossible on, a few people prior to meeting me. And I to be honest, I couldn't have given a fuck about going to this meeting. I was literally just like, I'll do it because you're asking me to do it and you've been pestering me about it. But like, I don't need to, I don't have a problem. You might think that, I'm not as reliable as I could be, but it's your fault because you're not getting me the jobs that I want. It was never my fault, basically. Just, I'd brush whatever under the rug. And I went to speak to him. And I purposefully, obviously, didn't have a drink that day prior to meeting him.
Yeah.
And we sat down, and he looked at me and he goes, "God," he goes, "you reek of alcohol." And in my head, I went, "You fucking liar!" Like, because I hadn't had a drink. And he goes, "Have you drank today?" I said, "No, I have not drank today, thank you very much." And he goes, "Did you drink last night?" And the night before, I'd had about half a bottle of whiskey or something. And I was like, "Yeah, I did drink last night." But like for me, not drinking that day was huge, right? Like I was just thinking, well, I literally haven't had a drink. And he was like, he's like, "You reek of whiskey," like to the point where, when my next client comes in, I'm going to have to explain to them that I have not been drinking. And I was like, it hit me really hard that like, I thought I looked and smelled fine, but like I clearly smelled really badly of booze. And then he was talking to me about, one step at a time, and let's do a week. Come back in a week. Don't drink for this week, and we'll assess, situation. Cause I was telling him that I didn't have a problem, blah, blah, blah. And I did a week of not drinking, and like, truth be told, felt amazing, right? Like I was literally like brain working at 1,000,000 miles an hour, able to go to the gym. Came in and he said, do another week, do another week. And like, honestly, I was so sanctimonious. I was literally just like, I felt like a totally different person. Did 6 months. And then actually became sanctimonious, thought it was too easy, and just thought, well, now I can throw in a couple of drinks here and there because, whatever, this was so easy. But I actually destroyed that really, lovely sober time that I'd have by going back to drinking. And then, I drank again for, some time before realizing that actually, look, I've got, a child on the way, and, my drinking habits, at my age probably just aren't sustainable. Went sober and kind of never looked back, and I've honestly I just completely love it. And look, it's probably not for everyone. Like if you don't have like a drinking problem, then maybe sobriety is a massive step, and it's, maybe unnecessary. I know a lot of people who can have 1 or 2 glasses of wine with dinner, 2-3 times a week, and that's it. And in that case, that's fine. Right. I'm talking about, if alcohol is really getting in the way of your life, and it's really getting in the way of who you want to be, who you want to become, like who you can be, right? I've always had like mad expectations of myself. I've always, thought to myself when I was very young, like that I will be a huge success, and like, as I said earlier, I've always had this natural kind of confidence, and that became increasingly unlikely, right, as I got into my late 20s, like as I would wake up at 11 a.m. and as I would just like roll into the office late and not really caring, and not making the kind of money that I could be making because I just didn't really care. And I began to realize that there was a really good chance of mediocrity in my life, that I may actually just become less and normal, and for me, and there's nothing wrong, by the way, with being normal, but like I've always wanted more from life, so that was scary to me. And those nights where I would drink a lot, and I'd be sat there feeling a bit drunk, like watching TV, and I'd just be like, I there's a real chance I could become a real loser here. Like, I can drift into middle age drunk, having not really achieved much. And I count Made in Chelsea as achieving nothing, right? I don't care at all about that side of my career. Great that it gave me some opportunities that I've managed to kind of, grow. And of course, the early stages of CleanCo being somewhat recognizable was really helpful. So I hope people don't hear this as, biting the hand that fed me. What I mean by that is that people grow and evolve, right? I'm no longer proud, essentially, of Made in Chelsea. I don't think it's that big a deal. It's a reality TV show that is still running that, I have moved on from. I've outgrown, right? So, and I hate it in the press as well when you just refer to as, Spencer Matthews from Made in Chelsea. That's like calling me Spencer Matthews the barman, right? Because I was a barman when I was 17 or 16. I don't understand how it's such lazy journalism, right? To just continue to call that's like saying Spencer the broker. Like, I'm not a broker anymore. Moved on, right? So it's kind of, I find the whole thing to be, just because that is what you're recognized for, that it just sticks with you. It's impossible to get rid of it. It's always Spencer Matthews from Made in Chelsea, always. And that person, like, I don't even like that person. I'm not surprised that people don't like that person. Like, I don't like that person. And I think it's very possible to grow so much and change so much that, I would expect and hope that people understand that, although you have one life, it's long, right? Like, what you're doing when you're 19, 20, 21, and what you're doing when you're 33 can be 34. It was my birthday the other day. Completely different, right? It can be completely different. And people, people don't change. Of course people change. You grow up, right? Like, of course people change. So, I don't know. I've gone completely off piece there. I can't remember what you asked me.
No. There's so much in that. And I think, so the kind of what I'm pulling at is, you've basically said, you were kind of born with this confidence and this desire to do more and be more and have ludicrously audacious goals. I think is what you've referenced in other podcasts, and I'm a big believer in that. Then it almost seems like the booze came gradually piling in through kind of the broking, and my housemate was a broker, and he's just, they're on it all the time. It's like get on the piss all the time, and it's almost like a badge of honor. So that almost came in and kind of muddied your personal why of like trying to do more. CleanCo then comes along, and what I love about, because I think I listened to a podcast where you said only 87% of the market don't know what low to no is. And what you've done there is almost, you've got rid of the booze, and your why, and I think your why as a brand is the most important thing. Your why has almost come from here, this inner confidence, and it's now manifested in this, 254 hours, is it? Like, we sell you
252.
252, sorry. Yeah. We sell you 252 hours, and suddenly, bosh, like, I think consumers are going to get that. Consumers may not understand what time is, what clean booze is, but they will understand time. And I think it's making your why universal, which is what you guys have done, I think is genius, and that's come from stopping the booze.
Yeah, but also it's kind of, it was so clear to me at Like when I realized that, you know, this is what I was going to spend my time on, it was like being hit by lightning. It was like being struck by lightning, right? I was at a dinner party. I'd been sober about 3 months. I wasn't finding it hard, to be honest, because I loved being sober so much. And as I referenced earlier, like, it's all or nothing for me. So just completely taking booze off the table was much easier than that constant back and forth of like, well, you know, I don't drink much alcohol, but I do drink. So when should I drink? You know, it was just a constant kind of, well, it's Friday. Like, shall I drink today? Or no, I'll save it till, you know, my mate's wedding. It just bollocks. Just either drink or don't drink, you know, for me was the only way to do it. And I would have the old, you know, Heineken Zeros and Lucky Saints and other great, you know, non-alcoholic beers. And essentially, I'm not sure Lucky Saint was out actually at that stage, but I would have non-alcoholic. Lucky Saint's my favorite non-alcoholic beer currently, but at the time I would drink Beck's Blue, you know, Heineken Zero. And literally I went to this party and the person hosting the party knew that I no longer drank. And I came in, and the first thing she said to me was, "Do you want a non-alcoholic gin and tonic?" And I was like, "A what?" She was like, a non-alcoholic gin and tonic. And I was like, "Yeah, what's that?" I was like, "Tonic water." She was like, No. There's a non-alcoholic gin." I'm like, "What?" Anyway, so like, I'd never heard of it before. I was so.
What year was this?
This was 2019 or the end of 2018. And it was Seedlip that she was talking about. And, you know, and I had this Seedlip and tonic and, you know, saw her pouring it like gin and tonic and with a slice of lemon and the ice. And I was just like, oh my God. And I tasted it and I just thought it was like wildly interesting, right? And it was that one that's kind of really clovey and stuff. And, you know, despite not tasting like gin, which, by the way, is something that they don't claim to be. Like, they make no reference to gin whatsoever. I think the fact that you mix it with tonic makes people call it a non-alcoholic gin. But actually, it doesn't say that anyway. It's not a gin alternative. Doesn't say it on the bottle. Doesn't say anything to do with gin. It just says mixed with tonic, right? So super smart. And I just thought it was completely fascinating, right? I'd never heard of it before. And all dinner, I couldn't talk to anyone. All dinner, I was just thinking, well, hang on a sec, like, why isn't it called a gin? And why wouldn't it be like, you know, juniper based? And why wouldn't they make it taste exactly like gin and call it like non-alcoholic gin? Like, what the hell? Like, and I was like scouring the internet, nothing. And I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna make the world's first non-alcoholic gin. And and I was so excited by it. And I flew around, I went to Cork and I went to all these distilleries and people thought I was crazy. I was like, I want to make a gin, but with no alcohol. And, you know, this bloke, you know, was like, you're fucking mad, you know, and basically, like, I'm trying to find a way to do it. And anyway, long story short, we, you know, ended up with our first product, Clean Gin, which at the time had 1.2% alcohol because we couldn't make it 0.0, couldn't get the flavor profile and couldn't do it. And, you know, the rest is history, I guess, but I couldn't quite understand. And obviously there are certain other brands that do it now. But I couldn't understand why you wouldn't just play the gin bat, you know, go down the, you know, let's make this taste like gin. You know, hence our first campaign, if you like gin, it's like gin. Despite not being able to use the word gin, just so you know. But I thought that was very funny because we're literally saying it's not gin. But, you know, we used the word gin twice, which really upset the Gin Guild. But anyway, so it was kind of, we've had loads of fun with that and them, by the way. But I think it's important. And then I'm sat there thinking, well, we should make a rum, we should make a tequila, we should make a whiskey, you know. And at the time we were called the Clean Liquor Company. And then, you know, I wasn't quite sure whether or not we should go into wine and go into beer, and I didn't want the kind of spirits handcuffs on at all times, and also liquor is a very American word, you know, and it was getting mistaken for liqueur quite a lot in the UK, like the Clean Liqueur Company, and even though it quite clearly said liquor, and I thought it would be cleaner, and took a leaf out of what's his name in The Social Network, when he says to Mark Zuckerberg. No, when he says to Mark Zuckerberg, drop the, it's cleaner.
Right.
So I dropped liquor and company and just called it and the. So I dropped the liquor and the company and just called it Clean Co. instead of the Clean Liquor Company. Scott, was it Sean? Who is he?
I haven't watched that film in yonks.
Scott Parker. No, Sean Parker. Sean Parker.
Yeah,
right,
I need to watch that.
His greatest contribution to the company. I love that scene. I think it's so great. I love that film in general, to be honest. The Social
It's
Network
a good film in terms of like it get back to that kind of ludicrously audacious goals. Like if there's any film like that, like watch that. And that's kind of what I feel like with this podcast, doing it from my parents' bloody dining room at the minute. Do you know what I mean? It's like
yeah. No, but mate, you'll be well. Firstly, I'm really enjoying it. I think you're a really natural host. But I think you know, all investors will almost always miss out on the, you know, crazy kind of egotistical Zuckerbergs, right? Because they only come around every so often. So, you know, as an investor, I don't think you're right to wait and look forward to those kind of opportunities. But I mean, yeah, that film is fantastic. I love The Big Short as well.
Both
those are my two kind of go-to. Like if I'm ever just bored, like, or in an airport lounge or something, like, I always find new little things from, particularly The Social Network. I just love it. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there's something about watching more films or less books, but reading them twice because you learn more. I think there's something in that. And because sometimes I'll read a book like 3 or 4 times. Like literally this book's my favourite book of all time, The War of Art. Like I've read it about 10 times, but each time you read it, you get more from it. But I want to go back to, because I've had Ben Branson from Seedlip on this podcast, and it's so interesting what you say, because he literally says we are not a gin. Like he says, like it's got a taste more like a botanical garden. Like they did this whole thing at Chelsea Garden Show. What I loved about when I tried yours is you get that fucking burn that you want when you're having when it gets that burn of the gin.
It's worth mentioning as well that, you know, my inspiration for CleanCo came from Seedlip. You know, a lot of people, for whatever reason, think that we're, you know, massively anti-Seedlip, and we're not. We do a completely different thing to Seedlip. Obviously, we're in the same space, competing for the same shelves, you know. But I think what Ben Branson created, particularly when he was the first, is amazing. And like my hat's completely off to him. I think it's fantastic. What I like to think of us is, you know, that we, you know, if I had to be honest with myself, and, you know, I think, you know, we took an idea and made it better, right? So that's the way I look at CleanCo. You know, it's different. And I think, you know, they're more of a nature company, I suppose, than anything else. That's certainly how they present themselves.
That's exactly what you said. And what I want to talk about is this, kind of focus versus MPD, right? Because Lucky Saint, and again, they've been on the podcast, they're like, right, we want one product and we're just going to go get hell for leather with that and just grow the distribution, do less better, focus. Again, like you're like, you've kind of got this like, fuck it, we're just going to launch everything. It could be wines, it could be, it could be, I don't know, like RTD gins. How are you balancing that either kind of one camp is focus and do less better versus if you don't innovate, you die kind of thing? Like, what's your take on that?
I think with experience, you become more focused. So when we first launched, it was wild. We wanted 1.2s and non-alcs. We wanted 5 gins, 5 whiskies, 5 rums, you know, and it was just, there was no focus. It was kind of, let's fling stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And I think, you know, when we did the deal with our US partners, we were on the verge of going into Australia and Europe, you know, Benelux. We had, you know, an order in from Russia to go into Russian retail, you know, and we were literally about to go global, you know, at the same time as doing the American stuff. And Jim Clerkin, who's the ex-CEO of Moet Hennessy, a business partner of mine, was like, you need to stop all that. You know, we need to focus on the markets that we can lead, right? Like nobody is going to be interested in acquiring a business or that is thinly spread and, you know, fifth or sixth in all these markets. You know, you need to be number one everywhere you go. And we don't have the money or the time to ensure that we will be number one in all these markets, right? We're not going to be able to do it. So you need to lead in the UK and you need to lead in the US. that's what you need. And we took that advice. That doesn't mean to say that we won't go, and spread our wings a bit further, but it's important to us that we do lead the markets that we're in, at least at an independent level. So I guess being more focused is kind of less fun as an entrepreneur. Like I would love to just do more. But it's what's right for the business for sure. And by the way, so we obviously have several SKUs, but like they're pretty different, right? We have a whiskey that's coming out in January, which is great. And then we have a pink gin, a rhubarb gin, and a normal gin. That's because the UK is a massive gin market, so it's nice to have some variety. Then we have a tequila, Blanco, a rum, and in the States, a spiced apple vodka, and that's it. So, each SKU is very different. And that is so that regardless of what cocktail you like drinking, we've got something for you. So if you're a rum drinker, we've got rum, tequila, vodka, et cetera, et cetera. So, and the whole concept of CleanCo was to make the bar call positive and to make things simpler when, and again, not to speak ill of our competition, but when you have, for me, you don't even need to be familiar with our brands to understand what you're getting, right? So you can have at a bar mojito, clean mojito, $9, $7, whatever it might be, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's clear, to me anyway, at least, that the clean mojito is probably either a healthier version of the mojito or a skinny version or whatever you want to call it. But at the bar, it's probably a non-alcoholic version, right? So it's kind of, I don't need to know that my mojito is made with clean rum. It's kind of like, oh, it's a non-alcoholic mojito, a clean mojito, cool, right? So it's kind of like, I always had these visions of people going to the bar. Hey, we want 10 gin and tonics, 6 of them clean. Or hey, we want, 10 gin and tonics, 2 of them clean. It's a really easy way of ordering things. Whereas, and I really hope people don't think that I'm dicking on Seedlip here, because I'm definitely not. But like, you need to be aware of what Seedlip is, right? If you go to the bar and you order a Seedlip and tonic, what's Seedlip, right? Okay, it's this botanical blend of, peas, hay, cloves. Oh, right, okay, I'm familiar with that brand. I like the product. I'm going to order that. It's not a general way of ordering a drink, right? So like, for me, it's kind of, I feel like a martini. Great, I'll have a clean martini. I feel like a Negroni. I'll have a no-groni, or whatever the hell you want to call it, a clean Negroni, So, I don't know. For me, the non-alcoholic market, particularly in spirits, can be quite complicated. And you need to be familiar with what you're buying before you buy it. Unlike beer, where it's just like, there's a Heineken, and that's a Heineken Zero. Like, cool. It's the same thing with no alcohol. And that's what we wanted to create for spirits, although I find non-alcoholic to be negative and zero to also be negative. And I hate the word mocktail. I can't stand it. I find it just really, like, when has anyone ever ordered a mocktail and been happy?
Well, they're mocking themselves if they order it. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, exactly. You're not going to say, mate, can I have a bloody mocktail of like fucking pina colada with nothing in it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it doesn't. It is. Yeah, it's. So anyway, hence clean cocktails. I just think is a nicer way of looking at stuff. And we're doing a live today. This won't be out by then, but we're doing a live with my wife today, where I'm going to be making some clean cocktails at 6 p.m.
Oh, so, I'll be tuning in, mate.
You can tune in.
I love that, because I think there's so much in the simplification, and I think, again, it's great for our listeners, because I think lots of listeners start with these, as you say, you need a pretty big, ludicrous, audacious goal, whatever it is. But then maybe when I want to talk about gym in a sec, but almost having that kind of bringing it in, focusing it down, and keeping it simple, stupid, like, but I mean that in a positive way, in terms of like, not the clean liquor company, like that's too much. Making it super easy for the consumer to understand your why at every touch point. So clean at the bar, the selling you the time, not non-alcoholic drinks.
Yeah.
I would love to know how did you guys, maybe the first retailer, I think it was Sainsbury's, you were saying, how did you guys drive the rate of sale? Because we all know, everyone listening to this podcast, that once you get onto the shelf, that's kind of like only half the work. Like, then it's getting it off the shelf and getting it repeat purchase. Like, how did you do that?
So we were fortunate to launch with I think it was very clear to people how much this meant to me. I very rarely use my Instagram. I post the podcasts that I do, and just so that people know where to find them, and whatever else. But I don't really ever post anything that meaningful, unless of course I have something to say, right? Like you won't catch me just letting you know where I am and what I'm up to and what I'm eating. I don't care. I don't care to be that public. But I had quite a few followers from Made in Chelsea and the other TV shows that I'd done, and when I kind of poured my sorry, there's a plane flying over me.
Don't worry, mate. Planes, tractors.
Yeah, there we go. I'm in Jersey, so So when I came to launch the brand, I wrote a big post about it and how much it meant to me and what it was. And obviously, for many people, it would have been the first time they'd ever heard of non-alcoholic gin or low-alcoholic gin at the time. And we immediately amassed, 35,000 followers, I think, in a day, for the business, which I think was really cool. Obviously, it's just people that follow me, so that doesn't necessarily translate to sales, but we were doing significant volume kind of D2C like straight away, basically, because people, I think, liked the idea, they liked the story. My wife is obviously more popular than me, and everyone prefers her, so having her kind of singing its praises as well was really helpful. And I think we had a kind of buzz around us that most startups might not have, because it was really authentic, clearly really mattered to me. And we had a lot of social support. And then, at the time, the shelf in Sainsbury's comprised of just Seedlip and us. So, we were competitively priced at the time. We were £1 less than them, I think, or they were at £28, I think, initially, and we were at 25. Obviously, as the category has kind of grown and developed, that price has come down. The shopper in non-alcoholic drinks is really price sensitive. Premiumization doesn't exist yet, really. That's not to say that the products aren't premium. Of course they are, but you don't get people buying $300 bottles of non-alc because of the way in which it's made. It's not, there is no Dom Perignon, there is no Belvedere, there is no the Grey Goose. That came later in booze, right? This idea that of very expensive premiumization, and currently people are price sensitive. So our price has gradually dropped as the price of our cost of goods has come down as we've scaled, right? So we have been able to offer the customer a better price, as the company has grown, because the necessity to hold margins has kind of decreased, because we've been able to become more efficient with time for our own costs. And essentially, it's been interesting to watch. The arrival of Gordon Zero, Tanqueray Zero from Diageo completely changed the category here in the UK. They came in at nearly half price to where Seedlip was in the early days. And as such, stole enormous market share from independents quite early. And of course they have brand recognition. They are the Heineken Zero, right, of the category, because you look at Gordon's and Tanqueray, you recognize both of those brands, you understand what they are and what they do, and they have a zero on the bottle. Fine, that's non-alcoholic gin, right? They don't have to do. And of course, just remember that as independents, we're not allowed to say the word gin. We can't say we're non-alcoholic gin. We can't even say we're a non-alcoholic gin alternative on the bottle. So I think, in the UK, we're clean G, distilled botanical spirit, or clean G, so we're dancing around what we are on the bottle, right? And they obviously can still say Tanqueray Zero, Gordon Zero, because they're not saying gin, right? But it's gin. So there's we're a natural disadvantage to them from the kind of very beginning, and also just the brand heritage is strong, and the price point. So sorry, long-winded way of explaining the kind of one of the tougher elements of competition that we've faced, in this recent year. But stealing market share from them has become, instead of growing a category, which of course we're still, like to think we're pioneering, and particularly in the States we are. But, in the UK, beating Tanqueray, and beating Gordon's has become, the task instead of growing a non-existent category.
No, it's so interesting because I think in some respects it's great because it's a nod that the category is growing if they're piling in and letting them almost do the work for you, so that when the consumer comes to the shelf, I think when categories become, well, with brands clamoring for finite shelf space, that's where brand wins. So like Tanqueray and stuff they can release a product at half the price, but they can't do an authentic cocktail making class like you and Vogue tonight, right?
Yeah.
So there's advantages where brand wins when the competition come piling in. I think that's really interesting. And in terms of the price point, are you not trying to keep it like a premium then? Because I swear I always thought that it would be keeping that premium there. Is that not the?
So we are at a premium to Tanqueray and Gordon's,
right?
But we are a lower entry level than we have been in the past because that is the way the market has gone. So, 80% of the category have never spent more than £16, on a non-alcoholic spirit. So if you are above £16, you are only playing to 20% of an already small category. So, a lot of the independents that are priced up at the £20, £22 price point are just declining at the moment. So in order to grow, I think you need to, listen to the customer and understand, what people are happy to pay for this kind of product. And then particularly when there's Tanqueray and Gordon's, at lower levels, if you want to be competitive, you can sit at the top. We're the largest independent in the UK by, a long way. And we can either be comfortable with that, or we can try and, compete with the two lead dogs from Diageo. And, that's not even a question for me.
No, I love that. And I want to talk about Jim Clerkin because I think I'd love to know, when the first day you met him was, what that was like. And what's like one lesson he's taught you that you probably wouldn't find in a business book or business school, from his, because he was at Moet Hennessy, wasn't he? What was his?
Yeah, he was the CEO.
Right.
Of Moet. And yeah, I guess the business kind of step changed for me when we received an investment from Ursula Berns, and it's probably a better story than when I met Jim, although I will answer your question. But Ursula Berns, if you don't already know her, was the first black woman to be a Fortune 500 CEO. She rose from nothing, but when I say nothing, I mean like nothing, like 0000, right? Like to being the CEO of Xerox, multi-billion-dollar company, as I'm sure you're aware. And she's written a book, which is amazing, called Who You Are Is Not Where You Are. And she is just really, inspirational. She's the most incredible woman. And she, coincidentally, when Trump got into power, she's done a lot with, she does stuff with Biden now, did a lot with Obama for education. And, she's quite a recognizable US business figure. And she moved into my apartment block. She was, lives a few floors above me. And, one day I helped her with her bags into the lift and I didn't know who she was at all. And, was just helping her out. And basically, suddenly occurred to me that this woman lives, in the penthouse of my building. And I was just like, wonder like who she is, right? So I Googled her and she's on the board of Amex, Uber, Diageo, and I was like, fuck is this woman? Like, what? Like, she's in my building. So,
yeah.
So I literally scampered together some clean goods and kind of, went upstairs, knocked on her door and we had a chat about it. And I was like, I'd love to pick your brain about what you think about the category and, what you think if you're interested in what I'm doing. And she invested in my Series A significant amount of money, and basically said, I need to put you in touch with these people. They're going to help you grow the business, exponentially. And I ended up on a call with a guy called Iriel Finan, of Coca-Cola, director of Coke, Jim Clerkin, who's the CEO of Moet, and Hugh Jackman. And and I'm sat in my living room on this call thinking, what the fuck is going on? And all of them were just like, I think it's great. And Hugh Jackman's telling me all these personal stories of him and how much he cares about what we're doing and how much it means to him. And I'm like, Wolverine is fucking telling me that I'm doing an awesome job and that he loves the business. Jim Clerkin declared himself in on the call. He was like, I love it. I love it. I have to be involved. I love it. And then basically he had to jump to another call, but he was like, shoot me an email. Let's figure something out, blah, blah, blah. And that was the kind of beginning of our relationship. The Hugh Jackman thing didn't end up working out, but, at the time, God, I'd done absolutely no research into whether or not he would have been a great face for the brand or not, white, male, in his 50s, et cetera, et cetera. So, would it have been the best deal possible for us? Hard to say, probably not. Although, the call was fantastic, because I'm a massive Hugh Jackman fan and just think he's a legend. So, we had, and that was the beginning of lots of really interesting, calls with, seriously fascinating people. And so, yeah, Jim Clerkin and I did a deal for basically him to run the Americas, with his team. And, we are where we are with that. He has a great network and is incredibly well respected. And, we continue to work together.
It's really interesting because I think, and I'd listened to a couple of podcasts where you do seem to have this knack for raising money. I think you'd raised £1 million over a lunch or something. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I'd love to know how, because lots of our listeners and I know how arduous it can be to raise money, right? And it's hard, but you seem to have a knack at doing it. I really want to kind of dig in. So if you could distill it down into 2 or 3 principles, why do you think Ursula gave you the nod and Jim did? What would you distill it down to?
Ursula.
Ursula, sorry, mate.
No worries.
Because I think that could be really valuable for our listeners.
I think I'm lucky that something that I happen to care about is also this booming space that happens to be on, the VC map globally, right? I think a lot of people are really interested in the space, and I didn't know that when I started the business, right? So that's luck. Right, that just happens to coincide, their interests and what mattered to me. And I think people who try and start brands the other way around, so they see what VCs are investing in, they see what's really hip and happening and whatever, and then go, right, I'm going to create a brand about that. By default, it hasn't come from, their heart of hearts type thing. It's come from, this is what everyone's interested in, so I'm going to do that. Which is also fine. Obviously, there've been, a million cases where that is really successful. But for me, I was lucky that it was the other way around. You could fall in love with something and want to create a business that no one cares about, and then raising money would be very, very difficult. So, it's not, I don't have some kind of magic wand. As I said, I was just lucky. And I think it's a lot of people, even funds, invest in the person, right? So again, I'm not, I say that not hopefully blowing my own trumpet, but a lot of these people just liked me, right? So I think it's important. I've only ever been really honest when raising money. I haven't ever said anything that I don't believe to be true at that time. And I've said that, often I'm quite fiery with it, and it's clear that I really care and it comes from the heart, and it's important. And of course then I usually have somebody else on the call with me who has the numbers and can explain. I'm not the most naturally gifted financial officer. I'm not even I'm not a fiduciary of capital. I'm not, I don't create the plans. Of course, I'm interested in it and have a say in what I think we should be doing and when, but I don't manage the forecast or the P&L. So my role is kind of more founder and I'm generally excited and care about what we do. You know, I drive the brand forward through the brand. I'm the chief brand officer now instead of the CEO. We've hired Billy Peretti, from Belvedere, formerly CMO of Belvedere, to come in and manage the business as a single kind of figurehead globally. And he's fantastic. So I learn a lot from him, but I don't know, to raise money, I think, you know, we raised money, you know, effectively, I think, because the proposition was believable. And, you know, I think ultimately I think people can fully understand why this can be as successful as we think it can be. You know, it's simple to understand it. You know, there's nothing complicated about what we're suggesting, basically.
Completely agree. I also think I did this talk at Bread and Jam about like the 7 principles of sales, and one of the things we came up with is like energy plus conviction equals influence. And I think having this conversation with you now, no matter what, and it's kind of go back to that piece we said earlier, like there's no route of failure, or there's no option to fail. It's having these wild, audacious goals. And I think people buy into that. And I think for our listeners, it's about whatever that have just this energy and conviction in what you're doing, and that will attract investors and attract people to join early on in the team. I think it's really interesting because that's what I'm getting from you, is this energy.
There's a guy called Mikey Pearce, right? And him and his partner is a girl called Verity Bodrich, who was actually on Main Chelsea, although I don't think I ever filmed with her, different times. And you know, he is similar, right? He kind of, it's quite hard to wade through what's serious and what's bullshit, right, when you're listening to pitches, because people who are overly enthusiastic in what they're saying either don't know, you know, it can be bullshit, right? But I think part of, if you can call it a skill, is trying to land, you know, the points in a way that's believable. And I bring Mikey up because, you know, he talks to you about, he has a company called Clean Kitchen, and they make, you know, vegan food. And you should talk to him, right? Because he's great. It's vegan fast food. They want to be, you know, the McDonald's of, the McDonald's of vegan food, you know, just grow like wildfire. And he's just absolutely infectious, right? When you talk to him and you believe him and you buy into it, and you go for a vegan chicken burger with him, and by the time you've left, you're like, well, where can I sign? I love it. And I guess, you know, I'm probably not doing a great job today of bringing that energy that he has, but back, you know, when I was raising money at the early stages, I was like that, right? You would want a piece of what I was selling because it sounded attractive, and I guess you believed me, right? So, you know, and I think when I invest in brands myself and people, because it's all about brands and people, and that's a Jim Clerkin line. You know, it's all about the brands and the people. You know, it's something that Jim Clerkin says, and it's true, right? And I think if you love what someone is suggesting, and you like them and you believe that they can do it, then that's kind of all I need to know, really, providing that the valuation's not, you know, crazy. But, you know, even, you know, you watch shows like Dragon's Den, and it's kind of like, you know, I want to sell you 30% of my business for 20 grand. It's like, your 20 grand's going to be gone in 3 days, and then you've sold 30% of your business. It's like, I've never understood it. I watched that show thinking, why isn't there a dragon that goes, okay, I'll buy your entire idea and your entire business for 200 grand, and, you know, we can call it quits. And I'll just take it because because you're undervaluing the business, right? Or like, some people come in there with amazing ideas, and the valuation is like, they're valuing the business at like, you know, 100 grand or 200 grand. It's kind of like, that's going to drive your shareholding into the ground by the time you've raised any meaningful money, you know, unless you 10x, 20x your business, you know, in the next 12 months, which you won't do. So it's kind of like, yeah. I've never understood why someone doesn't make a play for the whole idea, because that would be great TV.
Yes. Yeah, no,
and you can also see like how much they care about it. It's like, you know, if they're valued at 200k, you know, here's 200k for the idea. I'll take the whole thing. You can leave now.
Yeah,
Like, do you want?
Jokes. Yeah,
well, it'd be funny, right? Because then you can see if the people want the 200K or if they care about their idea. But it's kind of, I just don't really understand. The selling vast chunks of your business so early. Like, I guess sometimes it's necessary. I raised money from Nicole Quinn at Lightspeed. She was the first institutional money that came in. She did £1 million.
Who's she? Sorry, mate.
Nicole Quinn is a director of Lightspeed Venture Partners, and she invested in Calm. She invested in Snapchat. This is really early, like seed level. Goop. Jessica Alba's, Goop is Gwyneth Paltrow's, and she also invested in Jessica Alba's baby brand, the name of which has just escaped me. But essentially, she's a serial investor, fantastic asset to Lightspeed. And, she invested in me when I didn't know the difference between pre and post money. So like I had a valuation set aside just because I wanted that valuation. And she was like, is that pre or post money? And I was like, sorry, what? And she was like, is that pre or post money? I was like, post money, which is obviously the wrong answer. I wish I'd said pre. And she was like, oh, okay, yeah, great, cool, we'll do $1 million. And I was like, oh, amazing. And I called my brother and I was like, hey, Lightspeed are going to do £1 million. And he was like, that's just nonsense. He was like, it must have been like someone who makes the coffee or something. Like, there's no fucking way they're going to do that. And I was just like, well, they are, and they did. So it was great. But like, my point is, like, even in those meetings, like, she could have asked me anything. Like, literally, she could have asked me anything granular. I wouldn't have had a clue, right? I had a product there with me, and I had a listing with Sainsbury's, and she was saying, how are you going to ensure success? And I was like, well, because it's better, right? It's the best one. Like, I had nothing. I'd fresh off the reality TV scene. No idea at all. But she liked me, right? We got along really well, and she wanted to play that mentor kind of figure. She wanted to help. A lot of brands, a lot of VCs, want to help and build the CEO, right? Or build the founder with the investment because they think it's so early stage that, if you wade in there and you've got all the answers, you've got all the ideas, they're not going to add their value that they like adding. So I don't know. I guess I was lucky. Again, a lot of luck, I think, in the early stage.
No, for sure. And I'd love to, like lots of our listeners would kind of crawl through a field of glass in kind of February, I think, to get access to Jim and I can't say her name, mate. Is it Ursula? Is that, am I saying that right?
Ursula,
like the
octopus woman from Little Mermaid. Ursula.
Okay, yeah. Ursula and Jim. So I'd love if you could boil down their ocean of knowledge that they've taught you into like one or two sentences each. What would it be and why? Because I think that would really be impactful for our listeners.
Ursula's just a problem solver. So regardless of how serious it is, it's literally, she doesn't look backwards at all. She's not interested in like the source of the issue or who caused it or how it came to be. You land a problem on Ursula's desk and she literally just solves it, right? She's all about forward thinking. And because shit happens obviously, right, in business. So, you'll often see, well, whose mistake was it? And, how did that happen? We need to hear, like, how, and actually, like, that is time wasted towards solving the issue, right? So Ursula may wish to find out those things, but later, right? So she is just forward thinking, head down, fix the problem. You would want her on a sinking ship with you. She'd be the first with a cork.
Yeah.
She's great. She's brilliant. And Jim is, Jim just has a wealth of knowledge and experience kind of, in spirits. So it's just handy to have him on board and have a deep understanding of how the spirits industry works, right? Because obviously I'm realizing, quite late actually into our growth that we are not a premium spirits company. That's part of, what, led us to a life less wasted, right? We were spending an awful lot of time in a premium spirits vibe, like with our navies and whites and quite safe kind of marketing of we are a premium, non-alcoholic spirit, which is made this way. And, our juniper comes from here and this is how we make the product. And actually it's kind of like, I find that less interesting than understanding the benefits that can come with drinking the product. And I find that the birth of A Life Less Wasted was to use kind of graffiti, color, like black and white imagery, like just splashes of paint all over stuff, just like how to live life in the most exciting way possible, right? Instead of, you know, how to compare and contrast ourselves to all other existing products. You know, I just think ultimately, if people are going to drink clean, or if people are going to drink clean coat, they want to know why. Why should I drink this, right? So I think Jim has always just been a really kind of solid bloke, you know, with good opinions, right? Like, you know, he ran Moat Hennessy, so he obviously has a wealth of experience of, you know, business at high level and you know, typical trends, I suppose, within alcohol.
No, I love that. And I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned from doing this, and I've interviewed so many guests now, is that brands who push features, i.e. we're like 0.0 whatever, with taste like this, lose, but the brands that push the benefit, i.e. we save you time, it's fun, it's like almost like the graffiti's gregarious, like it's really in your face. Like, I think that is why I think it's going to go to that next level with this kind of brand refresh you've just gone through.
Yeah.
Because it just makes sense to the consumer. Look, mate, I'm conscious of your time because it's bank holiday and let you get off with the kids, but a few final more questions, mate, if that's okay. Sure. So how many, is it 252 hours? 252 hours, yeah, got there in the end. If you do so much Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you know, running this, like if you could do spend 252 hours on one new thing, what would it be and why? Something that you're not currently doing.
On one new thing, I'd like to read more books. I'm terrible with that. You know, I'm always, you know, even if I get into bed at midnight, you know, I'll put on an episode of something just before I fall asleep. So, you know, for me, it's, I'd like to read more. I think, just 2 secs. Neil, mate. Hi, buddy. Can I do that for you just after I finish recording? Okay. Okay, thanks. Yeah, but I know, but it's the noise, Neil. Sorry, it's okay. Sorry, mate. It's okay. No problem. No problem at all. So yeah, read more books. I think it would be great to learn more languages. I'm fortunate to speak French already, but I'd love to learn, you know, another language. And by the way, 252 hours is ample time to like fully learn a new language. And then, you know, the obvious one, spend more time with your kids and stuff. But, you know, it is infectious, obviously, spending time with your kids, and it is absolutely lovely. So, you know, I'd love to be around as much as I possibly can be for my kids. But yeah, in terms of, I mean, you know, I lift weights a lot, I run a lot, I do jiu-jitsu. So kind of any time, I already have the 252 hours back, of course, because I don't drink at all. So, you know, I don't need to question what I would do with the time, because I already use the time to do the things that I love doing. But I guess, I don't know, would I want to learn how to fly a helicopter? I don't know. Maybe.
I wouldn't get in those, mate. I think especially after like the too many of them have gone down in recent history, I would never get in one of those. And then, so again, this is an interesting question, and and I asked Ben this actually, and from CLIP, and there's this book called The Obstacle Is the Way. It's all about kind of stoicism, and it's the question is like, what is one seemingly insurmountable obstacle that was in your path on the clean code journey that actually paved the way forward? And what Ben said is that he fell out of this window at this 21st birthday party and got in like a bit of a scrap, fell out the window and lost his sense of taste for like 18 months or something like that, something weird like that. And then he came back and he got this, as soon as he could start smelling things, and that's where this botanical obsession came from.
Oh, wow.
I'd love to know what yours is. Obviously, the obvious one is like the sobriety, but is there anything other obstacles dotted along the journey that have provided you with lessons?
Well, I mean, in my case, it would be the sobriety, right? It would be, you know, moving from really problematic drinking, you know, and a life wasted to sobriety and a life less wasted, I guess, you know, and just yeah, you know, look, I've had some I've had a great life, and always look back kind of fondly on my childhood, so wouldn't change too much there. But I guess there have been, albeit fun, again in inverted commas, drinking at the levels that I was drinking, and falling into the holes that I kind of fell into can be quite dark. I have had times in my life, and of course the loss of my brother, and coming through the other end of the boozing, that has made me more mentally resilient, harder, calmer, and kind of more balanced. And I guess all of those things are helpful to business.
No, completely. And kind of want to wrap this conversation up where we started, and I think we started this with you having to kind of leave your kids to go on the Everest journey with Nim. And I asked this asked this question to all guests who've got kids, but what is one sentence piece of wisdom you're going to pass on to your I think you've got 3 kids now, right?
3 kids, yeah.
I'd love to know what that is.
Oh God, they're so young that it's difficult to even, understand, what to pass down. But, kindness, of course, is important. Determination. I think if you can instill, levels of mental resilience in your kids from a young age, that's great, but without being, overly hard. As I said, I had a great childhood, but I had quite a, there was a no nonsense attitude from my father, right? And he's Yorkshire, a Yorkshireman. So is my brother. They're much older than me. My brother James is 14 years older than me. And when I was growing up, crying was weak. You can't cry. I'd really hurt myself, and I couldn't cry around them. And that's turned me into this. I am quite unemotional. I can be quite unemotional. My emotions are never rattled.
Unemotional.
Yeah, my emotions are never rattled. Nothing surprises me. I'm quite bomb-proof when it comes to just wading through stuff. And I have grown up with the feeling that weakness is unacceptable, right? And the crying is weak, as I said, and of course it's not, right? Crying is not weak, and expressing yourself is not weak, and having emotions is not weak. But I've learned that quite late, almost too late, right? I want to make sure, despite having an awesome father and brother, and I definitely didn't have a tough childhood, but that element of it has suppressed my emotions and my feelings to the point where sometimes I feel like I don't have any. I wouldn't want that for my kids. Right. So I'll kind of always try and make sure that they express themselves, their emotions and their feelings, in a kind of, almost proactive way, because I disagree with that kind of, maybe hard northern way of thinking nowadays. I think, I don't think being emotionally expressive is weak at all. So, So nothing really bothers me. I'm kind of unfazed by most things, but almost to the point of it being quite machine-like, And
what did your dad do, out of curiosity?
He was a racing driver, so was my brother. Then he owned part of Plaxton, the bus company, and he was an entrepreneur basically, land investor, and then he bought the Eden Rock Hotel in St. Bart's back in 1995 when it was 4 bedrooms, cockroach infested, kind of very cool, but the island wasn't what it is now, and decided to keep it on as a hotel, and that's his main business now. Now it's I don't know if you know it, but the Eden Rock in St. Bart's is pretty famous now, and it was pretty famous back then, but for different reasons. It was owned by a guy called Remy Dehaenen, who's just a legend. He would carry a revolver and was just this kind of wild adventurer. He was the first guy to ever land a plane on St. Bart's and became mayor of St. Bart's, and kind of built this thing with his 2 bare hands and obviously a bunch of other people, but and had guests like kind of Greta Garbo and Howard Hughes and all these fascinating people of the times. And so there's, that place comes with all kinds of history. That's my dad's main thing. But yeah, he was, my dad has always been awesome, by the way. But yeah, I did see a therapist at one point about my drinking, and actually it was somebody else. It was not Chip, somebody else. He said that what was incredibly clear to him is that I've been suppressing my emotions, all of my adult life, and I guess I wouldn't want that for my kids. So that's really long-winded way of answering your question.
No, mate. It's fascinating because it's almost like seeing this resilience that, as I said right at the beginning, outside looking in, you've got resilience in your DNA, and like now understanding your father's journey from this hard-nosed Yorkshireman, it makes sense with what you're doing with the Clean Co and these journeys. But then also like kind of the razzle dazzle of the Eden Rock, and again it's this revered hotels, again kind of spilling into the branding with Clean Co, and then obviously with your kids you're allowing them to, or want them to, express their emotions more, and I think it's brilliant. Well, mate, look, I've really enjoyed this, and we'll be sure to look out for the documentary in Feb on Disney. It's on Disney.
It is, yeah. Thanks so much, Dan.
Happy days.
Great pleasure to chat to you, mate.
Awesome. I'm just going to press stop on that, mate.